When I went through customs, the officer asked me a series of surprisingly tricky questions. What's the purpose of your trip, business or pleasure? What's the full name of the person you'll be staying with, and how long have you known them? What are you bringing into the country? You're doing what in Canada? What am I doing in Canada? I went to see Neil from Real Terrain Hobbies for a YouTube video collaboration. The plan is to spend 5 straight days painting a huge and incredibly detailed resin village. These buildings are literally the best terrain pieces that I've ever seen. I've done some great marathon hobby challenges on this channel, but this is by far the most ambitious. We're about to spend 5 days painting and getting to know each other. It's time to kick this off. It's morning of day 1. Let's check in with these handsome men with their disappointing microphones. Welcome to Goobertown Hobbies. My name is Brent. Welcome to Goobertown Hobbies. My name is Brent. Welcome to Goobertown Hobbies. My name is Brent.
Hey, I'm Neil from Real Terrain Hobbies.
Today we have this in-person collaboration. I'm at Neil's house in his basement. We have a massive project to get through today. We have 20 incredible buildings to paint. We've got a couple of days to get this done, so let's get to it.
Yep, let's get at her.
Let's get at her. We'll check back in with those lads a few times during this video. The thing that I love about their audio is it makes you feel like you're right there with them. There in the moment. Excitement, determination, and maybe just a hint of apprehension. We've got a lot of work to do here, so let's get started. It's considered best practice to wash resin models. We don't want any potential oily residue messing with the paint. We got a big vat of water and a bit of kitchen soap. We laid out some towels and got to work. Honestly, these models didn't seem like they had any residue on them, but better safe than sorry, right? So for our YouTube collaboration, Neil and I are each making videos documenting this project. I don't know whether or not Neil is going to tell you that we washed every single one of these buildings before we primed them, but we definitely washed this one right here, fresh and clean. Next, we got set up for a bit of priming in the garage. I was in charge of shaking cans, running the cameras, and bringing Neil a steady stream of unpainted buildings to work on. Neil was in charge of frog walking around his garage and spraying the buildings. For the most part, we did a good job of fairly dividing the work during this project, but I am super grateful that Neil took charge for this priming step. It's cold out there. He worked mostly with 3 colors: tan for the bits that would be plaster or stucco, brown for the shingles, and gray for the stonework. Getting sensible primer colors onto different regions of the buildings is going to save us a lot of time later. It was definitely worth the effort of switching between these colors and getting started off right. When I'm at home, I use an airbrush frequently in my work, but for this project, we agreed that we would be using spray paint and hand brushes to do everything. Partially, that's because we didn't have an ideal airbrushing station set up, and partially, I just think it's nice to stay low-tech sometimes. Since we won't be using an airbrush, Neil is getting the most mileage that he can from these rattle cans. One of the crazy features of these buildings is that the floors come apart to reveal interiors. The insides are complete with wood floors and plaster walls and windows and doors and all that stuff. It's one of the reasons that these Tabletop World buildings are so cool, but it also means that each of these buildings has a ton of surface area that needs to be painted. There's a mini wargaming video that shows off these buildings, and in their case, they glued the buildings shut. I asked Neil if he was planning on gluing the buildings shut. No. We're doing everything, inside and out. By the way, this garage was the closest I came to getting outside for the next 5 days. International Terrain Painting Marathon Challenge collaboration videos are serious business, and there wasn't a moment to waste. Neil was out in his cold and misty garage for several hours getting everything primed. He pushed through and he got it done. By mid-evening on day 1, the terrain was all prepped and primed. After a lovely family dinner, we got set up to do some painting. This main table in the Real Terrain Hobbies studio is where the 2 of us are going to spend the next 4+ days. We set up some side-by-side work areas with newspaper, cutting mats, wet pallets, paint, brushes, and coffee. For me, one of the slowest parts in any project is figuring out the scheme and the color recipes that I want to use. Neil saved us both a ton of time and stress by painting one small building before I showed up on his doorstep. He figured out the color palette that he wanted to use for his village. He had also tested some reliable painting techniques to make sure that they would work well on these pieces. Washes, dry brushing, all good to go. He also test drove a clever way to use weathering pigments as grout or mortar between the stones. So we sat there as day one was winding to a close, side by side and each painting one of the smallest buildings in the set. By this point, Neil and Brent have known each other for just about 24 hours. We're sitting there chatting and painting and having a great old time. Here in the late hours of day one, I was getting to know Neil, but I was also getting to know these Tabletop World models. I've found that the best way to get to really know and understand a model is to sit down and paint it. Inch for inch, these buildings are just as detailed and rich as a nice quality character figure. Fair warning, these buildings are going to get a good deal of praise in this video. In addition to the excellent textures on the rock and the timber and the shingles, there are details like a barrel full of apples leaned up against this little house. The apples in the barrel are all remarkably distinct, and some of them even have a stem with a leaf or two. There are ears of corn on the wall. The kernels on that corn, the fibers in the husks, are all entirely convincing. Long story short, I'm having a great time. I'm also realizing that all this detail is going to translate into many hours of painting time. By a little after midnight, our huts were starting to look pretty nice. We decided to get some sleep and start fresh in the morning. The next morning, we got the buildings all out to assess how we're doing at the start of day 2. Let's see how these boys are feeling.
Good morning, Neil. We are on day 2.
Day 2, we made it to day 2, and here we are. We've got a lot of work in front of us done, a lot of priming, different colors of primer on different sections, and pretty good. I'm pretty happy with that. What about you? Do you think
Yeah,
we're on
pretty good. I'm
course?
pretty happy with that.
Yeah.
So actually, interestingly, I don't know if we're on course yet. We got the priming done, and we pretty much figured out our paint scheme. And we got the 2 absolute smallest buildings mostly painted.
And they took a while.
So
we're gonna have to speed things up here to make this work. So it's gonna be close. We're gonna make it work, I hope. So you think it's gonna work? I'm still on the
optimistic.
edge that it's you're optimistic? Okay, you're the optimist one. I'm the one who's doom and gloom, I guess. No, I think we can make it work. It'll be close though.
Yeah. Perfect.
It'll be close.
Perfect.
All right, you ready to get at her?
Ready.
All right, let's do this.
Back to painting. After the first day, the 2 smallest buildings in the set are looking decent. Prepping and priming the buildings was a serious accomplishment, but are we actually on pace here? Depending on how you count the wall sections, there are more than 20 buildings. To finish this project by the end of day 5, we need to be painting something like 2 buildings per day each. After we did our morning check-in for the camera, we each selected a new building and got back to work. The hope is that we're going to be able to fall into a routine and really power through this project. For a project like this, we could have tried working on all the buildings in one big batch, doing the stone on every building, then the timbers on every building. For a variety of reasons though, we decided that after the priming, we'd divide up the project by each working on one complete building at a time. In addition to being more manageable in terms of workspace, this strategy allows us to really learn each piece, to make sure that all the floors are internally consistent, and to make each building subtly different from all the others. It should also be satisfying to see finished buildings start to pile up over the coming days. So let's talk about the origins of this collaboration. Well, it started with Neil. Several months ago, he reached out to Tabletop World to see if they'd send him something to review. They sent him a few buildings to check out, and he loved them so much that he came up with an idea for a massive village diorama. Neil sketched out some maps of his village and convinced Tabletop World to send him, well, many more buildings. I've seen the schematics for this thing. When it's done, Neil's village is going to live on a terrain board 6 feet by 3 feet, and it's going to be incredible. Sending products to popular YouTubers to use and review can be an extremely efficient use of marketing dollars. If the product gets used in a video that people enjoy, the return on investment is massive. Still, for a small niche business, the big creative terrain that Tabletop World sent to Neil is no joke. It's a real show of faith in his abilities to make an awesome board and an awesome video that'll draw some eyeballs. Maybe Neil was feeling the pressure because he started looking for a partner to help him batch paint some buildings. A resident of the Real Terrain Hobbies Discord channel, a lovely man named Ryan, told Neil about little old Goobertown Brent. Neil got in touch, and it turned out that we both really liked each other's videos, and we were both really excited for this project. At first, we talked about mailing buildings back and forth, but it seemed more convenient for me to just head to Canada for a few days to lend a hand. I love collaborations, I love ambitious projects, and I love challenges. Doing this was a no-brainer for me. I invited myself to Neil's house and booked some plane tickets. By the way, travel to do a cool project for the channel is exactly the sort of thing that I want to be spending Patreon dollars on. In this case, I used credit card reward points for flights and Neil's hospitality for lodging and food, but still, from my point of view, this is exactly the type of expense that Patreon dollars should be going towards. Big, crazy video ideas that I might not do otherwise. Thank you to all of my past, present, and future patrons. You make it possible for me to do some really cool stuff on this channel. I think this project was a great experience for both of us. Sitting there, working and talking, we taught each other a ton of stuff. It was also really cool for me to see some of Neil's terrain and dioramas up close. Some of the pieces sitting on the shelf behind me are internet famous with hundreds of thousands of views. Taverns, inns, wizard towers, all the good stuff. Of course, I'd seen those on my computer before, but it was great to see them in person. I was always a little bit nervous about accidentally damaging one of those awesome pieces, but aside from that, it's great being around them. Day 2 is winding to a close. I don't think that we're quite on target pace, but I'm still optimistic. It feels like we're getting stuff done because we are getting stuff done. I think the buildings that we've painted look pretty cool. Maybe we're not going quite fast enough, but that's hardly the point. Anyway, day 2 is slipped through our fingers, it's time to get some sleep and wake up fresh for day 3.
All right, good morning guys. We're back on to day 3 now. Yesterday was our first kind of full day of actually painting and getting stuff done. We were working hard straight till 2 a.m. in the morning, and it was a long, full day of solid work. So I also think not only did we get a lot of work done, but it was also a bit of a wake-up call as to how much of that work actually goes into getting buildings completed.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on that, Brent?
At the beginning of yesterday, we each picked a building and we said this is going to be our first building of the day. We did our math and we figured, if we each do 2 buildings a day, we're on track. We're going to crush this project.
No problem.
And yeah, first building of the day is kind of a funny statement. We each got about 1 building done. So one a day seems to be about the possible pace. But we're learning how to do these things. We are getting faster. And each of these buildings has so much detail and so much surface area, and it's a lot of fun. We are getting work done.
It's just the fact that there's so much detail and they're so incredible. It's amazing we're getting one done, even just as it is.
Now that I think about it, yes, that actually is a pretty awesome pace, and we're hoping just to kind of keep that up today. We're hoping that maybe the walls will go a little bit faster since they're mostly stone and they don't have the timbers running through everything.
Yep.
So yeah, as you can see, today we did not set up our full impressive display of how things are going. We just have our work area out here because we got to get back to it.
We need to get back to it. We need all the time we can get. So, are you ready? Should we do it?
I'm ready. Let's go.
We've been falling into a nice little routine here. We've got our technique down solid. We paint all day long, and when we finish a building, we trade it in for a new one. I want to draw attention to that little moment for a second. Beside us, Neil has a second table set up with his village laid out and ready to get painted. I walk over and I put down the piece that I just completed next to a growing pile of finished buildings. Such pride. Then, I look at the assortment of unpainted buildings and I decide which one I get to paint next. I choose you. So as a nice bit of clickbait for the thumbnail of this video, I wrote the retail cost of this pile of terrain, somewhere in the neighborhood of $2,500, and somehow it actually feels like it's worth that much. Not many people are able or willing to drop that much money on resin buildings. I've certainly never been in the presence of a collection like this before. I'm standing there staring at a buffet of awesome terrain. It's Neil's terrain and Neil's obligation. For me, there's no strings attached. For me, it's like a playground. Should I play with this cute $50 piece or an impressive $200 piece? And since we're on a timer here, it's actually encouraged that I glut myself and play with as many of these expensive toys as quickly as possible. What a crazy, lucky situation to find myself in. My plan for each day is to pick the coolest building in the pile, whatever strikes my fancy. I paint it up and I make it look awesome. Any one of these buildings could be an amazing painting project for a whole week. Having all of those choices there in front of me feels like pure, nerdy gluttony. There's so many great choices of buildings to paint that Neil and I never fought over who got to paint a particular one. Neil eventually decided that he was going to be the guy to crank out most of the walls. That's fine by me. There were plenty of great townhouses and mansions to keep me busy. In some of the clips, you can see Neil's sons hanging out with us. These guys are a lot of fun to be around. We've got some shared interests of Star Wars and Legos and Jurassic Park, and those lads are even starting to get into Dungeons and Dragons. In my video, the family is just going to show up as a blur, since it's not up to me whether or not they get to be internet famous. But L&C, guys, it was a blast. Neil's wife Jay was also around, but she was sneaky enough to avoid the cameras. The whole family over there at Real Terrain Hobbies were super gracious to allow this strange goober into their house for an extended period of time, and I really appreciate it. I feel like I made some good friends on this trip. Something kinda cool happened while I was visiting. Somehow, my presence in the house got the boys hankering to start painting minis. Each of them painted their very first minis while I was around, and they paint fast. They made it through a pretty good percentage of the Reaper Bones minis that Neil had around. Good work, guys. Keep on painting. So yeah, for this project, in addition to painting, we're obviously spending some of our time setting up cameras and taking footage. Our goal was to collect way more video footage than we could ever possibly need. Get as many interesting shots as we could. That would give us plenty of flexibility when it came time to making up some nice YouTube videos for this collaboration. I actually took all 3 of my cameras with me to Canada. In addition to Neil's camera, we had the option of taking shots from 4 angles at once. I don't know if we ever actually had all of the cameras going at once, but we collected a ton of footage. The plan was to share all the footage between us and then go back to our separate editing computers and do some movie magic. Real Terrain Hobbies and Goobertown Hobbies each have a distinct style. You can see Neil and Brent sitting there working together on the exact same terrain project, but I know that each of our videos is going to be very different from the other guys and each very much worth watching. In addition to different styles, we took so much footage that it's likely that our videos wind up with very few duplicate shots. As I'm editing my video, I have no idea what Neil is working on, but I'm really excited to see it. You can tell from the atmospheric lighting in Neil's studio that he loves making gourmet videos in addition to gourmet terrain. If you look closely in some of his videos, there are CGI wizards running around his studio. I have no idea how hard it is to animate a CGI wizard, but Neil always puts awesome stuff into his work. Real Terrain Hobby videos are crafted with love. No pressure, Neil, but I'm expecting your video to be awesome. I'm vouching for you here, buddy. If you, the viewer, wound up on this Goobertown Hobbies video from Real Terrain Hobbies, please say hi down below and make sure you're subscribed. And if you haven't checked out Real Terrain Hobbies yet, I obviously highly recommend that channel. Head on over there, subscribe, and say hi. As I've been yammering away here, not only has day 3 wound down, we're actually well into day 4. It's time to check back in with the boys.
Okay, Neil, we are on day 4.
Yes, day 4.
Day 4.
Here we are.
Yep, and it's actually pretty late in the day. It's about 9 o'clock at night right now, and essentially we were just working hard all day. We were in the middle of this wall We got through it though. The wall is pretty much done, and yeah, that's a big chunk of it out of the way, so we're feeling good about that. Happily, that went relatively fast because it's mostly stone and then all the weathering and all that stuff. So we have 1 day left, essentially.
One more to go. Yeah.
And we're gonna have a good collections of buildings done. It's maybe not gonna be all of the buildings we set out to do, but it's gonna be a nice village. And so we're at the
Very
stage
nice,
where we're just choosing what we want to do with the last 24 hours. So, Neil, what does the next day look like for you?
Yes, for me, you got your assignment there. I'm going to be finishing off the town gate, which is a behemoth of a building, but it's got a lot of stone. The stone actually went on relatively easy. I think that's the detail is large enough that you can do it fairly quickly, so that wasn't so bad. But then we got this section here, and then I want to tackle this big, massive merchant shop right here. Get that guy going, hopefully done. You think we can get these two wrapped up?
So we're on the last day, so we do not need to conserve sleep. We don't need to pace ourselves. I myself is my last full building, this one right here. So two of the largest buildings in this collection. And we're gonna push it, see if we can crank through this last day and really get a nice finished most of the village out of this. So
I think so. Yeah,
I think so too.
sure.
Yeah.
Alrighty, let's get to it.
Let's get to it. See you tomorrow, guys.
See you tomorrow.
So it's become clear that I'll have to fly back to the US before we completely finish this set of terrain. Still, we should have a really nice village ready for some glamour shots before I have to get back on the plane. For my final building, I chose this noble townhouse. For this building, I made sure to grab enough shots to make a full painting tutorial video, which will be coming out soon if it's not already. The general style of our painting process was to use big, cheap brushes and craft paints where possible. Then, we switched to Vallejo model paints and smaller brushes for the details. We tried to get the core colors of the interiors down, but it was the exteriors where we focused most of our attention. Years from now, Neil will still be neatening up those interiors. There's a lively debate in the RPG community about whether or not interiors to terrain buildings are worth having. From my point of view, these interiors are a bit small to play out any tactical skirmishes. On the other hand, it would be a pretty flavorful way for a GM to hide surprises inside a building. The party returns from the wilds and enters the tavern. Let's see who's in the tavern. Oh no, there are 5 bandit minis in the tavern. Or the party enters the tavern and there's no one at all in there. But the GM left a folded up note, a clue, a hook for the next adventure. Not that you'd actually play out a scenario in those cramped interiors, but the existence of a model room with a preloaded surprise can add suspense and fun to opening up a door. Maybe zombies have taken over the town. The party decides to hide in a building. Which building will you pick to run into? Hope there aren't any zombies in that building. Let's open up the second townhouse on the left and see if anybody or anything was hiding in there already. As an alternative to the GM rolling dice or just telling you what's behind a door, having that tactile experience of opening a mystery box and finding a physical surprise is pretty cool. It might make the party more interested in exploring the town. Anyway, that's my take on these interiors. Not big enough to use as an actual game space, but plenty big to hide some twists and clues and new NPCs in. Neil and I spent 5 days chattering to each other about the awesome details and textures on these buildings. The stucco and the timbers and the shingles are all great. For me though, the real standout in this product is the rockwork. The gaps between each piece of stone are so deep that the models really feel like they were built rock by rock. Each rock has a rough texture that really feels like granite to my hand. Besides just looking cool, all of this deep and sharp texture makes dry brushing and washing techniques work exceptionally well. Deep rivets retain wash, and sharp ridges are easy to highlight with a quick dry brush. Pretty handy. My favorite technique that Neil showed me is using weathering pigment to make grout. It's common for grout or mortar or cement or whatnot to be a light gray or beige color, and it's frequently lighter in color than the rock it binds. For mini painters, a common way to paint rockwork is with washes, but this tends to result in the grout taking a darker color than the surrounding rock. This method of dabbing pigment powders into the cracks between rocks and then fixing it with a bit of water is awesome. It really looks like grout, and it's lighter in color than the surrounding stone. That doesn't show up in mini painting very often, so this is nice. I give Neil all the credit for coming up with this paint scheme. He made 2 major choices before I showed up. His first choice was to use realistic colors. Personally, I love painting with bright colors, and my first instinct was to make these look like Warcraft buildings. Brightly colored roofs, tiled in blue or green or maybe purple. Neil, running a channel called Real Terrain Hobbies, advocated for realistic buildings. I do enjoy this realistic look, and it leaves me room to maybe do a fantastical village someday if I get my hands on some of my own resin buildings. The second big choice that Neil made was to have the windows look as if they were lit from inside. We painted the windows an ochre color and then gave them a heavy wash with reddish brown. This gives an easy and convincing effect that makes me think that there's a fireplace and candles and lanterns in these buildings. Depending on how much wash you use, you can get some windows looking brighter than others. This makes sense, and it looks awesome. I worked on this noble house until the early hours of day 5, got a few hours of sleep, and got right back to it. This is a big piece, and I wanted it to be a prominent part of the finished village. On day 5, in addition to finishing that big house, I helped Neil with some of the remaining details on the walls and the giant gatehouse. So for these marathon challenges that I've done, once I have the plan, the only real trick is to keep working. One color after the other, piece by piece. Marathons are about mental and physical stamina. The Real Terrain Hobbies family was a fantastic support staff. Delicious meals and good conversation. They helped us stay at the table and work. When I invited myself over to Neil's house, I told him that we'd be working 14-hour days. And we really did. We put in the hours and we got a lot done. The only time I walked outside of Neil's house was to head back to the airport once our time ran all the way down. Now, if I had left the house for any other reason, I would have bought Neil a nice office chair. Neil's workstation is comfy enough, but a nice ergonomic mesh office chair with lumbar support? Oh yeah, that's what us professional sedentary folks use. Highly recommended for anyone who chooses to put in some serious hours at their hobby desk. But like I said, I didn't leave the house. Work. Late on day 5, we made a final push. Finally, as our time was running down, we cleaned our brushes, stood back, and marveled at all we had done.
So here we are, guys, day 5. It is the end of the line. We have come to the end of this epic journey. This has been a massive 5 solid days, at minimum 14 hours a day. We're, as you can see, exhausted. It has been very little sleep that we have gotten, but we have done an incredible amount of work. And just seeing it out here for the first time, Brent and I are just looking at this for the very first time. What do you think, Brent?
Yeah, exhausted, but joyous, and still got some adrenaline. And yeah, anyone who plays tabletop or RPG games has kind of thought about maybe having a collection like this someday, and it is super cool to see it all done. And so all that hard work was definitely worth it. These are looking great. And beyond that, I actually really did have fun over the last 5 days. These were a great time to paint.
Yeah, and I just got to say thank you, Brent, for flying yourself out here. This was all Brent's idea, all him, to come out here, fly all the way from Maine in the US to middle of nowhere Canada and help me paint some terrain. That is incredible, and you are welcome back anytime.
Happy to do it.
Anytime.
Thank you for putting me up in your home. Thank you for feeding me. Thank you for letting me work on this stuff.
Absolutely. It's been an honor. It's been a joy. This has been incredible. An awesome experience. An awesome 5 days.
Well, glad you think so too. But yeah, Neil showed me pictures of all the unpainted terrain that he had lying around, and I invited myself over and came over and got to work on it. So win.
So we've got so much done. There's a few buildings left. I've got a bit of work left to do. This guy is almost done. I'm going to ride this momentum. One thing Brent has taught me that I'm not really good at is perseverance. Like, and that is huge. And the confidence that I've gotten in myself from just, we had no choice. We had to do it.
Yeah. Neil left the house once in the last 5 days. 0 times for me, but yeah, you gotta persevere, get that hobby done.
Yep, exactly. So yeah, I got a little bit of work ahead of us, but man, we've accomplished a lot.
Yeah, so here's your first shot of the whole project pretty much done, and we're about to cut to some close-ups and rearrange the village a little bit and throw some minis in there and just a whole lot of glamour shots that we're looking forward to taking. Yeah. So we're gonna have fun, and I hope you enjoy it too.
Yeah, enjoy, guys.
This village is so awesome. It's now late on day 5, and we have just a few hours left until we need to go to the airport. The last thing to do is to get these glamour shots. I actually brought a nice selection of minis with me to use as props. I mentioned earlier how awesome it was to see some of the internet famous terrain in person here at the Real Terrain Hobbies studio. Along those same lines, I brought some of my most internet famous minis to dress up this cool village. Orcs and barbarians and goblins, all sorts of good stuff. Some of my friend Alex's Bretonnians? Sure, why not? Some Lego minifigs? Yeah, the more the merrier. The best part of having a set of terrain like this around is the stories that you can tell. Get some minis, some buildings, and a couple of creative folks around a table, and you're setting yourself up for a great time. Any game can be more fun and atmospheric with some really great terrain. In general, I recommend that people take their time and really enjoy the process of painting. Of course, from time to time, you just gotta go on a week-long hobby bender. Everything in moderation, including moderation. One of these buildings could easily be an awesome week or two of hobby time for a reasonable person working at a reasonable pace. Or maybe a really productive long weekend. I'd heard Luke from Luke's APS Geek Gaming rave about these resin buildings before, and I've gotta say, he was right. They aren't cheap, but they're also not that much worse than something like Games Workshop terrain. They come almost fully assembled, and they don't have mold lines. They've got tons of detail, they're fun to paint, they've got cool interiors. I like them. We went all out with our painting, but I still had to leave Neil with a handful of unpainted buildings. A windmill, a water wheel, a bridge, a blacksmith. The good news is that over the next month or two, he was able to finish them all up on his own. So if you want the full version of this story, you gotta go check out Real Terrain Hobbies. Neil also has some footage of the original unboxing of the massive shipping crate that all this came in, and he's got a ton of other footage that I don't have too. Eventually, he'll have a video of a village diorama board using all of these painted buildings, and I'm really looking forward to seeing that as well. On the Goobertown Hobbies side of things, this video was about the journey. I also plan to make a detailed painting tutorial video for one of these buildings, so keep an eye out for that. Neil and I helped each other on some of these buildings, but here are the 5 buildings that I painted all by myself. I did average 1 building painted per day. I painted big ones, small ones, simple ones, fancy ones. I love all of the pieces that we made that week, but these 5 are special to me. With all of them together like this, I called them Goobertown. Thanks so much for watching. And remember, you're always welcome in Goobertown.